I'll go again. Welcome to today's meeting of the Environment, Housing and Communities Scrutiny Board of Leeds City Council. Just for the information of those people who are watching today on the webcast or later on when it's archived, because I have to warn participants that this is forever a record of our activity. I will introduce myself. I am Stuart Galton. I am the chair of the board, and we are going to introduce the rest of the board members to my left.
Thank you, Chair. Luke Farley, Labour Councillor for Bermondsey and Richmond Hill.
Good morning, folks. Councillor Adrian McCluskey for Farnley and Wortley.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Karen Renshaw, representing Alcyon and Robin Hood.
Councillor Kate Haig, Farnley and Wortley.
Morning, Councillor Jane Dowson, Chapel Allerton Ward.
Morning, everyone. Councillor Shafali from Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Morning, Councillor Lou Cunningham, Armley Ward.
Morning, everybody. Councillor Norma Harrington, Wetherby Ward.
And we also have, of course, our experts on hand to support us today.
Becky Atherton, Principal Scrutiny Advisor.
Thanks very much. Due to our introductions having been made, we'll go on to the formal part of the agenda. And the first 5 items are items which normally run through quite quickly. So, item 1.
There are no appeals today, Chair.
Item 2.
No exclusions.
Item 3.
No late items of business.
Item 4. Declarations of interest.
Just like to declare a non-pecuniary interest. I am a trustee for the Leeds Refugee Forum.
Thank you very much. Any apologies, Becky?
We have 3 apologies today, sir. Sir? September time. Councillor Anderson, and we are expecting Councillor Firth to attend as a substitute shortly. And then Councillor Annie Maloney and Councillor Hannon are both also sending apologies today.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to our first item of business, which is the minutes. Do we have any matters arising from the minutes from members of the board before I report back on other items? No. Okay. So for the benefit of the record, within the minutes, minute 21, it's just to confirm that after the discussions which we had at the previous scrutiny board around the enforcement and jurisdiction of issues around mobility and highways, I will be attending the IIIG scrutiny board, which is the Investment, Infrastructure and Inclusive Growth Scrutiny Board, so that the discussions that we had as members can be transferred to their discussion around the Vision Zero 2040 strategy. And we do have a paper which is to be approved later in the agenda, which is a written record of that, as well as our own testimony on the day. Minute 23, you will note that there was an action for me to get in touch with the Police and Crime Panel of the Combined Authorities Policing Function to discuss the possibility of us working together on looking to find a solution on pavement parking to respond to the needs of our disabled citizens which are having issues in that area. Unfortunately, it turns out that the agenda setting regime at the Police and Crime Panel does not allow this subject matter to be discussed until July next year. So we're going to be seeking alternative means to have that interaction with the Police and Crime Panel in the interim, and we'll be corresponding with members of the panel, which are representatives from Leeds, to enable that to happen. Minutes 21 to 23, also there were assurances that would be made from the mayoral unit of the combined authority, where they were going to update us on issues of shared interest around legislation for the enforcement of antisocial behaviour associated with electric bikes, the financing of the police function, and also around the jurisdiction of enforcing the pavement parking issue again. However, we have still yet to receive that correspondence, which is disappointing, but members will be informed of that once it is received, because it, I assume, will be before the next meeting that we have, which is in November, isn't it, Becky? Okay, so can we have a member who is willing to approve the minutes? Councillor Haigh and Councillor Cunningham to second. Thanks very much. Okay, on to our substantive business items, and we're on to the work programme. Do we have any comments from members around the items which are suggested? Just to confirm, while we are perusing them, we are going to pursue, with your approval as members, an extra work item on our equalities stream, which will be to look at the street charter, which is there to enable our disabled citizens to have a better relationship with the highway services of the council to ensure that their needs are taken into consideration. And of course that would be in parallel to the 2040 zero strategy. Is that okay? Brilliant. So we'll now move on to item 8, which is migration in Leeds. We have quite a lot of people in attendance, so we really appreciate you offering your expertise in this area for our discussion today. We have Councillor Venner, we have Paul Money, who will be introducing the item, and I will allow others to introduce themselves before we start the main discussion. Thank you very much.
I'll speak first, actually, if that's okay, Chair. Thank you for having me at your meeting. I don't come to this scrutiny board very often, just when there's relevant items, so it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I feel an incredible range of emotions introducing this item today, I have to say, after the distressing and turbulent end to full council yesterday, but also in the context of the rise in far-right activity and racism that we're seeing across the city and that we're dealing with as councillors. However, I do think, and I hope for you as well, that this report does provide some optimism and shows the really compassionate, welcoming, inclusive side of our city, and also the vast contribution that migrants make to Leeds, whether they come here as economic migrants or students or people who've come here seeking sanctuary. So I hope you've enjoyed reading the report, because it's so rich in detail of all the work that we do across migration in Leeds. So over the past 2 decades, there's obviously been a huge amount of turbulent change in the world, and we've aimed to address that and respond to that with clarity and purpose and compassion. And Leeds has a very well established and strategically embedded migration framework. We've got a really fantastic dedicated team within Paul's team of Safer, Stronger Communities, led by Priya, and really critical to the work. And also we have a really vibrant third sector in Leeds who work with migrants, and particularly with refugees and asylum seekers, and we have a fantastic relationship with the third sector, and they do a huge amount of really vital work. I think what comes across really clearly in the report, and which I know myself from my many years in the third sector, is that third sector organisations are often more accessible to people from marginalised groups. They're often less threatening because they don't have statutory power, but also Not that we are threatening, but sometimes we're perceived as such, obviously. But I think grassroots organisations in communities often are easier for people to access. And of course we have a lot of lived experience in our teams within the council, but particularly in the third sector. There's a lot of people working in migration who came here as migrants themselves, so are working from their own lived experience. So we aspire to be a city that's welcoming, and we also need to respond and do respond to national policy shifts. And we need to deliver services, of course, that are compassionate and effective, but also coordinated. And that's the work that the migration team do. So over recent years, we've had people coming from a number of different humanitarian routes into the city. That includes the Hong Kong nationals who are here under the British Nationals Overseas Visa Scheme. And of course, we've had people from the Ukraine under Homes for Ukraine. And the report showcases a number of the really impactful projects that operate across the council and in the third sector. Councillor Hamilton is my deputy, and who I share with Councillor Harland, who works with me particularly on asylum and migration. And one of our highlights is that we visit a lot of the third sector organisations regularly, and we go to the Migrant Access Project. And it's really heartening to see firsthand the way we're working with our partners to make people welcome in the city, and the way we're supporting people to become community leaders themselves. So the Migrant Access Project supports people to become leaders for their communities and for them to support people coming to Leeds and help them learn to navigate the city. We're really proud of the work being done, and really, particularly in this climate, are committed to amplifying the voices and the stories of migration which reflect the true spirit of the city, because there are far more people in the city, despite what you might see on social media, who are positive about migration, who are welcoming, who can see the value that migrants bring to us. And there's a lot of really great celebratory work out there. The national picture is really complex and really fast-paced. So we need to be linked into what's happening nationally, regionally. We have a good relationship with Migration Yorkshire, and we will continue to lead this work with compassion, with skill and experience, and with a deep appreciation of the value that migration brings. So the report and the appendices provide detail of the work on a range of topics relating to migration. I'm really proud that we continue to build on the expertise that we have to respond, and that Leeds continues to be a city that is welcoming and that benefits hugely from migration. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, from my point of view, there's not a great deal more to say other than what's just been covered there by Councillor Venner with that quite detailed overview of some of the work that we're doing, but also, as Councillor Venner says, the way in which we're trying to do this work. Perhaps what I would just do is just reinforce the fact that we too, from an officer point of view, really welcome the opportunity to talk about the work we're doing on migration with Scrutiny Board this morning. It's been a very fast-paced, evolving environment for colleagues to work in, and the opportunity to do that, I think, is really helpful, because the objective really is to be as effective as we can in this space, and not take anything for granted in terms of the current arrangements. Although, as you can see in the detail in the report, there have been significant developments even in the last 12 months that the team have been responding to. I did also just want to reinforce the point Councillor Venner has made about the value and the contribution of third sector organisations in this space. Often those organisations have a level of trust with communities that allows us, working with them, to be that much more effective. Without that level of trust and without that engagement, things would be very difficult for us. So our migration partnership is a really effective partnership, and a lot of the work that partnership is involved in is kind of referenced in the report. But I think it would be remiss of me not to comment on the value that we see in that partnership work and the commitment that we have to supporting that partnership kind of moving forwards. So thank you for the opportunity this morning.
Okay, thank you. So it's just to remind members that we've been provided with this update, but there is also an expectation that the professionals here are seeking our views so that the refreshed strategy can be updated appropriately before it's sent off to scrutiny board. To executive board. So your perspectives are valued. I'm going to start off with Councillor McCluskey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. It's hard to scrutinise something you totally agree with. But one of my concerns is how can we better deal with the misinformation, the lies that people are being told about the migration, the process and migrants' experience, because that's the bit that I'm getting tackled with, and if I challenge it on social media, I'm told I'm being unpatriotic. Thank you.
I'll respond briefly from obviously a politician perspective, and then Paul or Priya might want to add. So there's some really good information out there on migration that's accurate. So LASSN, Leeds Asylum Seeker Support Network, do a lot of the coordination of information for the sector and for other people. We fund them to provide information for people who are new to the city in terms of information, but they also produce just a lot of really interesting, good factual information about migration, as do Migration Yorkshire. From a more political perspective, Hope Not Hate also have some specific resources which are for councillors or for politicians to be able to tackle disinformation. Obviously, there's a lot out there. One of the things I find particularly distressing, and particularly having been the Children's Cabinet member for such a long time, is the weaponisation of the Vogue agenda and the suggestion that asylum seekers are a risk to women and children. Actually, the sad reality is that most children who are harmed or abused, the overwhelming majority are harmed by their own parents. Children are more at risk in their home than anywhere else statistically. And children are usually hurt by people known to them, not strangers they meet in the street, not people living in accommodation. So I think there is information out there. Yes, and we have a responsibility to inform ourselves, to seek out that information. But as I've said at a previous meeting this week, I am also gathering some stuff myself that Luke's helped, Councillor Farley's helped with.
Councillor Haig. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, that question is such a significant issue for us at the moment in terms of the challenge that I think we're dealing with, that I just wonder whether we could just have a couple more minutes just unpacking exactly what the response to that issue is, and building on what Councillor Venner has talked about there, because misinformation, disinformation is clearly, as local elected members, you're seeing an awful lot of that. We are too, as officers, and we are responding. The time it's taking to respond to some of this misinformation versus the actual work that we kind of want to be doing in this space is problematic. So the sooner we can get on top of that misinformation, the better. The challenge is, as I know you'll all appreciate, it's not as simple as that. But just to give you some indication as to the approach that we're taking, there is some work being undertaken nationally with other local authority areas that we're very engaged in around a cohesion framework, part of which will deal with this volume of misinformation, much of it on social media, much of it not attributed to any one individual, but nonetheless really problematic. So we're very engaged from a Leeds local authority point of view in that national agenda, and we're also about to launch our own Leeds cohesion strategy. And within that strategy, there are some tactical interventions where we recognise we need to be much more nimble, particularly with dealing with social media. It's challenging, but we have got some initiatives that we're looking to progress. I don't know whether Mark or Priya could just spend a couple more minutes just maybe unpacking some of the anti-rumour work that we're doing, if that would be okay.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Chair. Mark Charlton, Interim Head of Community Relations and Cohesion. There's a number of initiatives we're working on with Migration Yorkshire and others, and we're also looking at what's happening in other cities, because actually this is a national problem rather than a local problem. I think some of the work we can do, we are proactive in terms of education packages and things we do through the Prevent programme that actually seek to tackle some of these more views that are maybe considered extreme. We are also getting an increased number of freedom of information requests that are asking questions that are based on misinformation and disinformation. And whilst we can directly address those, it still prevents us from doing what we want to be able to do more proactively. I think how we react to what's on social media is a massive challenge. It's not something we could put out on a council page, because I think people that are spreading the misinformation and disinformation don't want to share what we have. So how do we become a louder voice in that particular argument? And then there is a further piece of work that's been done regionally and nationally around anti-rumour work that we have members of our team currently working on as part of wider cohesion. So we are trying to tackle it, but it feels like it's an ever-growing challenge for us, in that every day brings something new, something different, and a new rumour that we've never heard before and find ourselves responding to.
Councillor Haigh, were you on the same subject matter? No. Would you mind if I bring in Councillor Farley, because I think he is? Is that right?
Well, I've got a comment on the social media, but then I've got a broader comment on the report. So can I come back on the social media and then?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow back on the issue of kind of social media and the spread of hate online. You know, it's very clear if you go on the website formerly known as Twitter. There was a very organised effort by the far right to share misinformation, to share false information. And I mean, I suspect that this is probably a bigger question than what Leeds City Council can deal with. So I suppose to frame that as a question, how are we working with the government and national bodies to tackle the hate, the racism, you know, the anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim prejudice, and all other forms of bigotry and discrimination that we find online?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Farley. I think the principal way in which we're working at that level, in terms of the scale of the issue, is through the national work that I kind of referenced in terms of linking in with other local authority areas in the LGA. Because you're right, there needs to be a number of interventions here, such as the scale of the issue. So we are in that national conversation, and we are. I think our collective voice is being heard. You know, in terms of significant changes, yeah, we're looking to secure those as soon as we can, in terms of potential support around how some of these platforms allow themselves to effectively become that kind of sounding board, that opportunity for people who are not articulating accurate reflections of what's going on in some of our communities. I do think we've probably got to attack it at different levels as well. And just coming back to the sort of the local Leeds perspective, we have been able to secure some additional resource to work with us, and some of that resource, councillors, will be directly aligned to local members, conscious of the both the issues that you're experiencing, but also the opportunity that's there with your own platforms in terms of those local representations. But we recognise we need some additional capacity on this. So there's some additional resource about to land with us anytime soon, one of which, a couple of different resources, and I'm talking here about officers, one of whom I'm minded to align to community committee activity. I'm also taking a conversation forward on this very issue with the community safety champions later on this month. So there's something here, I think, about attacking this issue from multiple perspectives, nationally and locally, and recognising locally there's more to do.
Councillor Haigh.
Thank you, and I've got a couple of different points, if that's okay. And first point I'd like to make, talking about the third sector, is it's hugely impressive as well that how much of our third sector is in fact supported and run by people who are migrants themselves. And I think that is such a positive experience of people coming to a new country and becoming involved in our communities in such a positive way. So that's just a comment. My next question, we've talked about hate speech, etc., but we are, subject to the winds of international politics. But I know that, and it is referenced in the report, for different migrant communities that can produce tensions within Leeds itself. So I'll particularly reference the Hong Kongers and Chinese nationals, and how alive are we to those conflicts and potentials for lack of cohesion, shall we say, and what can we do to strengthen those bonds within our communities so that people realise that is not necessarily something that should be playing out on our streets.
Mark, you want to come back in?
Thank you, Chair. What we've started to do recently is starting to build links into the migrant third sector even strongly. So we now have a fortnightly briefing, and that's a listen and share. One, for those to bring any tensions that they're actually feeling within their communities, but for us to share as well what we know and what's happening, particularly when you think of some of the tensions and protests that we see in the city. So that becomes really crucial for us in that we're doing that fortnightly. We do it fairly low-key, it takes about 30 minutes. They share any concerns, we share what we know and what we can share within the intelligence that's been shared with us so that we are all working together and understand the tensions. We are about 3 or 4 meetings in, but it's something I really want to continue because I think the more we listen and understand, the more we can respond.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dowson. Sorry, next one.
My other question relates to the work around City of Sanctuary, and as the Chair knows, my least favourite phrase is used twice in one sentence, lived experience. Lived experience workshop was held in July 2024, and it talks there about using the Greenwich engagement model. How far along are we with that work? And there are some aspects of that model, for example, talking about sharing of data or risk of data with the Home Office from GPs, and also embedded Home Office staff at Greenwich Council. How much of that stuff is actually relevant to what's happening in Leeds, and how far forward are we with progressing the borough sanctuary recommendations that are in the Greenwich report?
Mark?
Thank you, Chair. I think I need to go away and look into that a little bit more. I can't answer it directly. Sorry, Councillor.
Well, the link to the report and the recommendations are in the report we have in front of us. So do we have Home Office staff embedded within the council, would be question 1.
No, we don't, Councillor.
So that part's not relevant, okay. So there's, I mean, I would appreciate you coming back on, what that means in terms of adopting the Greenwich engagement model, because that's something we appear to have done, but I'm not sure it is actually directly comparable. Their migrant population is very different to ours, so I would like to see our own plan coming forward, as rather than adopting something which isn't directly relevant.
Priya, you want to offer an insight on that?
Yes, please. Thank you. We've looked at various models across various local authorities that are City of Sanctuaries and that have achieved the Local Authority of Sanctuary Award, and we're embedding those practices. We're looking at good practices, and that's where we're up to.
So, what's the status of the Greenwich engagement model then? Which is in the report.
I'll double check the details and I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Councillor Haigh. Councillor Dowson.
I mean, 3 points, really. The first thing is to really just, as a comment, to thank you and the team and the third sector organisations for all the work you do. It isn't easy. And I sit on the third sector partnership. We talk about the vulnerability of third sector organisations with regard to funding. So it might be quite nice to hear how you feel the funding of vital services for migrants is in Leeds, and where we can try and protect those services. I like the sentence you've got, help people who migrate to Leeds settle quickly and thrive, and I think that's really such a great ambition. I also am councillor for Chapel Allerton Ward, where the Ukrainian Centre sits. And you have the hub, the regional centre, which acts as a hub for migrants from the Ukraine. So it would be quite nice to hear some of the issues, some of the things that are coming forward at that hub, and how secure that hub is in offering that support. And finally, I love language, and I think language is power, especially for women. So I note that we're the third. Leeds ranks within the top 3 cities for the highest number of residents who cannot speak English well or at all in comparison with other core cities. So I'm just wondering what we are planning to do to give our migrants that power of language. How are we planning to enhance our ESOL services? Thank you, Chair.
Mark.
Thank you, Chair. On the funding perspective, we are funding part of the migrant third sector, and we're looking at a new funding round based on funding received from central government coming through. We've not formally put the details out, and we're just working through that at the moment, but that will be an 18-month fund that supports specifically the migrant third sector. Such is the value we place in what they offer, their views, their perspective, but also the support they offer that we can't. So that one is fairly strong. If I could pick up on then the language issue, the ESOL strategy sits with employment and skills, and we do have regular meetings in terms of what that looks like. We do have provision of ESOL that goes into the migrant third sector, and perhaps we could look at how that's strengthened through the wider strategy, and it's conversations we need to push through employment and skills in terms of how they do that, and then how we fund a more broader scheme given the number of people in the city.
I'm just wondering if sitting with employment and skills is perhaps the best place for it to sit. Should it not sit with communities? But I don't expect you to answer that. That's a bigger sort of more political decision perhaps, but it's just a thought.
Councillor Venner.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond with a political point about something I've been lobbying on, lobbying as in lobbying national government, that at the moment within legislation there's a bit of an arbitrary cut-off that when people come here seeking asylum they can't access English classes till they've been here 6 months. It's a bit of a ridiculously arbitrary cut-off, because the reasoning for it is apparently people may not be successful in their claim and therefore we won't teach them English. But of course people's claims aren't settled within 6 months ever, or very rarely. So it is a bit of an arbitrary cut-off, and it stops people being able to integrate into Leeds. You know, it increases isolation. So the third sector does find ways around it in that they don't teach ESOL, because obviously they're not funded to do so, but they'll run things like conversation clubs and cafes and drop-ins. So people are getting opportunities to practice English, to learn English. You know, we get people coming to those from the hotels who, it's not only about learning English, it's about getting out of a really difficult environment, meeting other people, being in a warm, welcoming inclusive environment. So I think that's a flaw in the legislation, which I have been lobbying on. I have to say, not successfully so far, but you know, it would help integration, and it would help people settling here if they could begin English classes sooner.
Kerry.
Thank you. I was just going to come in and talk a little bit about what we're doing at Leeds Housing Options around translation, because obviously we have a lot of people approaching Leeds Housing Options, and we've just at the end of a translator project, which is, I think it finishes on the 15th of September. That's been really, really successful in enabling people to not just access housing advice, but talk with the benefits team and other teams that sit within the hub. We know that the sort of initial findings are that we need to add a further increase in languages, but the aim is that once the pilot ends and we know what languages need to be included, that we will continue with that. So that's been something that's been really successful in housing.
Thank you, Kerry. That's helpful. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, I mean, I've just got a few comments. I'd just like to start by saying, Kelly, this is a really important document, and it is welcome to see. I'm really lucky as a councillor for one of the inner city wards, Bermtos and Richmond Hill, to have the opportunity to meet all different people from a huge variety of backgrounds. And I think my level of knowledge and understanding since being elected about a whole range of things has increased massively. So I feel fairly fortunate in that. I think one of the important focuses of this piece is around employment skills and education. We have a lot of migrant groups within the ward and across the wider city. And regularly, myself and my colleagues, we go speak to them, and the big ask that we get is around being directed to sources of education, to find better employment, because you meet incredible people who could be doing, really, really kind of fantastic work, but because of structural barriers, they feel that they can't get there. And I think this sort of ties in with earlier points with regards to language. One of the things that I think we need to try and aim for as a city is that everybody should be proficient in English. And that's not to disregard people's other languages, but having that level of ability to speak. And Councillor Dowson made a really good point. Language is important, and your ability to participate in broader society is dependent on your ability to communicate effectively. So I think that's a really important point, but it does tie in with the employment and skills agenda. I think another area where of a special focus is around engagement with women in migrant communities and the empowerment and education of women, so that I think quite often due to circumstance the opportunities just aren't available. My colleagues and I a few months ago went to meet a group of women from originally from Gambia, and they were really keen on finding out more about learning about English, seeking employment. And what was really apparent was that the necessary steps for them to get there wasn't actually that obvious to how they could find ESOL lessons. So I suppose it's a question of how do we go to where people are currently, and then finally I think we need to, when we talk about migration, not talk about migrants as being sort of like a homogenous block. There is a whole there's a whole world, if you'll excuse the, but there's a whole world of difference between different groups of people, and the sort of the knowledge and skills that, say, a cohort from Hong Kong may have is completely different to say our Roma community, and I think it's really important that kind of where we can work with communities to try and for want of a better phrase, I want to say upskill, but really sort of enable them to make a positive contribution, both to obviously the city of Leeds, but wider society as a whole. So yeah, I'd just like to close by saying it's a really important report, and thank you for all the work that's taken place. But I think those sort of like the key areas that immediately stick out to myself. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Do you want to have time to gestate what Councillor Farley was after and reply after hearing Councillor Firth, or are you ready now? Yes,
Thank you,
Priya?
Councillor Farley. Can you hear me? So yes, there are several workshops that we're involved in. One of the partnerships is around working with employment and skills and third sector in relation to skills and education. But we're also engaging and working very closely with third sector and looking at some of those local support groups that provide those routes into communities and using funding to get involved with local learning.
Councillor Farley?
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly some really, really good work taking place across the city, and I don't want to diminish or ignore that. I suppose it comes back to the point with regards to different migrant groups are different, and some we've got fantastic third sector work that's taking place, but they're not necessarily engaging with all communities. And what really typified that for me was following the services last year, and some of the barriers we were met with when trying to engage with the Roma community, just as an example. There was clear language barriers, there was a sense of mistrust towards authority figures, and subsequent to that there's been a lot of good work that has taken place to engage with that community in particular. But again, the example that I cited earlier was the Gambian women, and thinking about how we can engage with cohorts like that who might not necessarily know about some of the third sector organisations there. I appreciate it's a little bit clear how do you solve a problem that people don't know they have, but yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Venner, you wanted to come in. Are you able to respond to that conundrum which has been presented in terms of our understanding of where our gaps might be that we're not responding to currently?
Yeah, I'll make a few points. So I know you will know this, Councillor Farley, because you're engaged in the sector, but for everyone else's benefit, RETAS that are referred to in the report do a huge amount of work in this area. It stands for Refugee Education, Training and Support Service. They do a huge amount of work around education and skilling people up for work. I think part of my response would go back to the importance of the third sector in this work, their accessibility, and the fact that a lot of third sector organisations and activism is grown out of lived experience and people supporting and championing and advocating for their own communities. So to take the Roma community, which I know you're very engaged in, there's a number now of initiatives that are in that community, like, is it called AIM for Roma? Yeah, that's led by people of the Roma community. I presented at an awards ceremony earlier in the year, which was a delight, which was it was giving community awards to organisations that were supporting the Roma community, which were primarily from within the Roma community around health, education, employment. So I think I think it's really important the way we nurture communities to provide that empowerment and advocacy and championing for their own communities. Just to add again a political point, because obviously I can. There is a campaign that I'm sure you'll be aware of called Lift the Ban, which is about lifting the ban on asylum seekers not being able to work. Alex Sobel, one of the Leeds MPs, is particularly engaged in it. It's obviously one of the biggest asks that comes from the asylum seeker communities, that they're allowed to work, you know, which is what makes the rhetoric even more sickening, that people are just sitting around being paid for by the taxpayer. People are desperate to work. They've worked in the countries they came from, obviously sometimes at a very senior professional level. When I was in my last job, where we set up a crisis service specifically for people from diverse communities, we work with a lot of refugees and asylum seekers. I've worked with people that are, you know, doctors, lawyers, teachers, psychologists, and just not able to work, and we're not harnessing that talent. So there is a political campaign, if people want to engage with it, called Lift the Ban, which is about trying to lift the ban on asylum seekers being able to work. Just some brief thoughts.
Thank you, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. In the report, it states recent changes in UK immigration policy, including the 2025 Immigration White Paper, have created new challenges and demands for local services as they adapt to evolving responsibilities. Could I ask for some more information on that?
Could you specify which page it is, please, Councillor Firth? It might help give context.
Thank you very much. Page 39. But it was a general point that's raised in the summary, and therefore I want to know what's actually the meat on the bone. No problem. The report states recent changes in UK immigration policy, including the 2025 Immigration White Paper, have created new challenges and demands for local services as they adapt to evolving responsibilities. And I wanted to understand the Council's understanding on putting that particular line in the report and what the challenges and demands are for local services that have come forward.
So it's specifically associated with that piece of legislation. Paul.
Thank you. So one of the challenges is the, obviously, the aim of this white paper is to reduce net migration.
Priya, could you bring your microphone a bit closer? Thank
Apologies.
you.
Is that better? So the aim of the white paper is to reduce net migration, and therefore there are a range of different responsibilities and eligibility that affects certain cohorts. So, for example, the white paper suggests that the health and care worker visas will be paused. They have been. We're waiting for further information from national government around those.
And how does that create new pressures on your service?
So the new pressures are understanding the impact at local level and how this impacts on services and local communities and those impacted because of that legislation.
Is that clear, Councillor Firth?
I'm surprised, just to make a side comment, I'm surprised that it's quite a bold statement to make, and then that's the only reason why, but I appreciate you answering my question. I want to come to point 37 that's on page 44, which relates to the fact of Home Office pilot, more locally managed asylum support model. I just want to ask, given the revelation yesterday that was exposed by Councillor Andrew Carter, in relation to the facility that's being provided through student accommodation from Leeds University in the Headingley area. Just wanted to ask, first of all, is that the only facility that's proposed that the Council is aware of? I appreciate it's a Home Office initiative, but we are in discussions with the Home Office, and that's obviously why the planning application came forward. And as a result of that, could you explain more about the actual time frame over which that will be delivered? Because unfortunately, until that was exposed, there was no information in the public domain. Excuse me, can I just come out that way? I just want to ask for more detail from officers, because the only time it has actually been discussed in the press is following the question that came from Councillor Andrew Carter yesterday, and then all the articles appeared online, because it seems the council responded.
Councillor Venner.
Yes, I think the use of the word exposed is somewhat inappropriate. The council yesterday produced a proactive press statement, and Councillor Jonathan Pryor answered the question very clearly that the Home Office have put in a planning application to amend what is currently student accommodation in Headingley to be able to be used for people additional to students, and that we are working with the Home Office on this being part of the plan to get people out of hotels. That also partly answers your previous question as well, Councillor Firth, that within the government's legislation and what's changing currently is the plan to get people out of hotels, which are really inappropriate places for people to be living for many reasons. And obviously we inherited a huge mess in terms of the amount of people that are living in hotels. So that's what's happening with Mary Morris House. I'll hand over to Paul to add in more detail. But we're being very open with the information that we have at the moment. This is in very early stages.
Thanks, Councillor Venner. I think colleagues will appreciate there are a range of accommodation settings being utilised to support asylum seekers, not just in Leeds, but in the vast majority of local authority areas across the country. We are supportive, as Councillor Venner has said, about the government's agenda to reduce the need for using hotels to accommodate individuals. The original intention going back some years was that hotels would be used on a very short-term basis only. That has clearly not been the case due to national developments. So we are supportive of the government's approach to reducing the use of, and indeed ultimately closing the use of hotels across the city. In terms of any other areas, accommodation settings or otherwise that the Home Office might be interested in, we are unaware of any other development. We do work closely with the Home Office on asylum-related matters, as you would expect, but there are no other premises that certainly I or the team are aware of in relation to any plans the Home Office might have for accommodating asylum seekers.
Thank you for coming back on those two particular points, because it does mention in the report that given that the local authority may gain greater responsibility and flexibility in managing the situation, etc., that will require robust planning. So I appreciate you answering that. The reason I particularly mention this point is that there's been a wider discussion particularly by colleagues opposite, in relation to misinformation or disinformation. Well, I would also raise the issue of lack of information as well that leads to the vacuum that happens. And as a result of the planning application that was submitted, there was no information on what actually that application was going to be, or what it entailed, where it had come from, until it was dug into further by Councillor Carter. So can I ask how long, given that robust planning, this particular facility has been planned for? And also, more importantly, could you explain a little bit more about the situation in relation to putting that information in the public to ensure that we then manage the situation within our control?
Councillor Venner.
I mean, it's not a planning application to start with to correct that misinformation. It's an application for a certificate of lawful use. The information that is in the council press release yesterday is all the information that we currently have. As I said, this is at very early stages. We have been clear with the Home Office that they need to work with us on an engagement strategy and a communication strategy, particularly with local residents, although I'm very proud to say, as someone in a neighbouring ward, that Headingley is an extremely diverse, inclusive, vibrant community, and I'm expecting the new residents to be made very welcome in that community. We will put out more information as we get it, but the information that was put in the public domain yesterday is the information we currently have, and we will be working on an implementation plan and a communication and engagement strategy with the Home Office.
Councillor Firth.
Thank you very much for answering those questions, and thank you for confirming it was only put in the public domain yesterday, which coincidence was in relation to a question that had been submitted the week earlier by Councillor Carter. I want to ask a separate point, which is in relation to what has been mentioned across the board about community cohesion. There have been obviously a rising number of protests, particularly in Seacroft, outside the Britannia Hotel. And one of the big issues, obviously, is ensuring that those situations don't inflame any further. Can I ask what community cohesion efforts have been made to ensure that the community surrounding that hotel, as well as inside the hotel, and how they've been engaged in the process? The reason why I raise that is the nature of, from residents raising concerns about the situation, about the management of those protests, the widening of the scope in which that area is covering, and certainly in terms of making sure that, given, in particularly in the case of the Britannia at Seacroft, that site has been a long-standing hotel that has been used for this purpose, and I just want to know a bit more about what's happening with the community to ensure that that cohesion is as best as possible.
Paul.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up the substantive points in that question, Councillor Firth, and thanks for raising it, because as you've rightly said, we have for some weeks now been experiencing public protest activity that hitherto has been overwhelmingly peaceful and lawful in regards its nature, but clearly the issue up there in Seacroft is of some concern. Just to reassure you in terms of our engagement with the local community, with the resident population at the hotel, and indeed with the organisation that effectively runs that hotel on behalf of the Home Office, MEAS, long before any protest activity was ongoing there, we were supporting cohesion efforts, working with the local community in particular, and especially thinking as well about the local elected members in that area of the city, who we've also been working with really closely. I think the fruits of our labours, so to speak, in terms of that engagement, has been helpful in terms of ensuring that those protests, which of course are a lawful right for people to protest, whatever the respective view is, and providing that's done in a lawful way, in a peaceful way, we are also actively facilitating that protest and not trying to restrict it in any way. The risks associated with the protest are very carefully managed through very close liaison, as you would expect with our colleagues in West Yorkshire Police, who supported by council resources, are providing support on the protests when they take place. We will continue to do that engagement with all stakeholders, and we will continue to facilitate lawful peaceful protest, and we'll do what we can to ensure that all stakeholders and the community up there in Seacroft as well is as supported as it can be. Clearly this links to our previous discussion point about the use of alternative accommodation settings, and it is our ultimate aim to see the number of people accommodated in hotels reduce, with an aspiration around not requiring those facilities at all. That's essentially the approach that we are taking in partnership. I don't know if there's any residual points, Councillor Firth, that you'd want to ask around that general approach that we're taking.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for a very erudite response. I just wanted to ask then, you mentioned a lot about working with those that are in the hotel and working with the different stakeholders. I just wanted to ask in particular, has there been anything done with the actual community surrounding? Oh, has it? Yeah. Well, I apologise. I take that back then. I'll move on to... Can I have one final question, sir? Chair.
If you promise it's your final one.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's been mentioned by Councillor Farley and others in relation to engagement, particularly with certain communities in and around the inner city, and the Roma community was mentioned, and obviously there was also a mention of being distrustful of authorities. And I just wanted to ask, is there any more that we can do, in particular, to actually promote what work has been done, because of the fact that one thing that I've had from comments from members of the public is sometimes a lack of information about what's been happening following the incidents last year, what's been done to actually ensure that people are understanding the work that the council is doing, if so much work is being done to ensure that nothing like that is ever repeated again.
Councillor Venner, I'm not sure if this moves on to crime and justice or whatever, but please talk about the engagement with communities.
Yeah, I'll start with
post-event.
this, with regard to how we build trust with communities when they come into Leeds. And I'll just give you one example, although there are others. So with the work that RETAS do, which is primarily an education and training charity, they do a lot of work with people that are new to Leeds, settling in Leeds, people who've just got their status. And one of the things that they do is they work on, you know, how to integrate into Leeds, how Leeds works. But within that, they cover how different authorities work, and they have people going into the courses to meet people. So, for example, they have the police going into those courses to meet with people who are new to the city, because obviously lots of people come from countries where the police are not people you would trust. You know, they're corrupt, they're not, you know, they're violent, they've been part of their oppression. So the fact that having to get across that the police are people that you can trust, that you go to for support, that are here to protect you, is really important. So the police are actively involved. They also go to things like the Migrant Access Project. Similarly, when I was moving from the children's portfolio to the equalities portfolio, which includes asylum and migration, I introduced social workers going into that forum as well, including children's social workers, because again, people, and obviously this doesn't only apply to migrant communities, but people are often scared of social services and may think social services, you know, can take away your children, and that's all they do. So again, it's really important that new communities understand that services are there, like family help, like early help, to support you in your parenting, to support you in your integration into Leeds, to support you in bringing up your children. So again, we've got social workers going into, you know, places like the Migrant Access Project and RETAS courses to help build that trust with authorities. And as councillors, we do that. You know, that's one of the reasons I go out to a lot of these places, is to meet people, to talk about democracy in this country, to talk about how councillors and members of parliament can help. So there is a significant amount of work going on, which is about trying to build that trust with authorities that people might not have because of the experiences of the regimes they've escaped.
Thank you, Councillor Venner. Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, in support of what Mr Money said earlier, I think the interaction between the Home Office hopefully has improved since we had the situation with the Mercure Hotel in Wetherby. And I know that an awful lot of work was done at that time to try to get the Home Office to understand the need to actually give information to local communities. So I'm hopeful that that's going to continue, Paul. My question actually is about the no recourse to public funds section in the report. And I'm just wondering, do we have an indication of how many people in Leeds actually fall into that category? Thank you.
We don't have a actual figure, but we do have figures for people that are classed as destitute, and that figure is within the report. And we are doing a lot of work to address no recourse to public funds and that support. And there is a working group that's been established and has a strong partnership, including with the third sector and statutory services.
Thank you. I've got...
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the comments, Councillor Harrington. And in particular, I'd hope your experience as a local ward member when maybe a few years ago similar issues were taking place. And I hope that is indicative of the way that we do look from an officer point of view to engage with local communities and especially local members, recognising some of the challenges that this presents. And I do think the relationship with the Home Office is better, partly as a consequence, I think, of these experiences and dealing with these issues in the way that we do, and also partly because, of course, whilst our primary engagement point is with the Home Office, this covers so many other government departments as this type of thing, thinking about department, for social health and MHCLG, and that connectivity with government has been challenging, but is a lot better. So I appreciate those observations. And would agree with Priya's point about no recourse to public funds. One particular area that we're really focusing on is domestic violence and abuse. And what we're really keen to ensure is that status in terms of being a victim of domestic abuse and violence should have no bearing really in terms of a response, having regard for the vulnerabilities that if we're as women often present with in those circumstances. So quite apart from the challenge around trust with local authorities and police and the like, due to experiences perhaps in countries where the migrant communities have come from, there's that need to ensure that our approach is consistent regardless of status, and we're working very hard on that, supported by Councillor Venner and others. So just to reassure you, that's a particular area of focus for us.
Thank you. I've got some more speakers, but they've spoken already, so I'm coming in. And then I'll bring them in. One of the aspects that I found about today's discussion, but also about the report as it's written, is that we spend a great deal of time on a very small proportion of the people who migrate to this city. And at the beginning of the report, on page 41, we include, for instance, so it mentions that there were 1,573 asylum seekers in the city, but we also had something like 18,000 students. And on top of that, later in the report, you talk about, and it was referenced earlier as a potential problem with the new legislation which is coming in, there are rather a lot of people who've migrated to Leeds to work within our care and our health system. And one of the things that I'm disappointed with the report, to be fair, considering this is meant to be a migration report on Leeds and not a report on migration-related services in Leeds, is that there's a lot about that and a lot about the potential problems for integration for asylum seeker or refugee-style migrants, but none of the reporting about those migrants that don't have any attention at all from the public services because they're just here to learn or to work, and the reason why they're here is an economic one, which is that the Leeds economy needs people who are, of the right category to deliver the wealth that our economy generates. So I would like to see a little bit more detail on that. And when we were talking about our social media strategy and how you counter misinformation, I found that one of the best ways to do that is to actually have some decent information of your own, which you can then focus on that instead of focusing what other people want to talk about. So one of the issues I would like to see, and I'd like to see some testimony perhaps from partners within the city, is the value, for instance, of the student economy in terms of that inward investment that it represents. Because I seem to recall that there was a report recently in Sheffield which showed that the university, as an economic driver, delivered more inward investment than the steel industry did for that city. And I think it's something that we could look could do with a perspective on here in Leeds as well. So yes, I'd like to see a little bit more of that. And there's some mention here in the report on page 41 around national insurance number applications. Now, depending on where your perspective comes from, somebody might be thinking, oh, that's so people can claim benefits. But somebody else might think, oh great, that means that people are wanting to be employed and pay tax. So I really think it would be useful for us to have some localised data around numbers like that, because I think it will emphasise potentially not just the challenges that migration presents to the city, but also the benefits that it brings. And I'll leave that with you and go on to the other councillors. Councillor Haig.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just briefly like to come back to the work we do with communities and taking in mind the Chair's very positive comments that he's just made, which is absolutely great. But communities around asylum-seeking hotels, they are not necessarily unwelcoming, and the protesters are not necessarily from that places. Would you say that's true?
Councillor, would you just repeat that? I think I agree with the yeah. But just repeat
so,
that.
These hotels have been operating for some time. We were introduced under many of them under the previous government, something that's been inherited. So that's been in use for some time, and those communities have, had a relationship with that accommodation for some time. The protesters, often inspired by a more national coverage of the position, may not be directly from those communities themselves, but be travelling in order to make those protests, which they absolutely have a right to do, but it's not necessarily a reflection on that community. And I think we don't want to suggest that those communities are unwelcoming.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating on that point, because I think it is a really good point. There is a varied response. Communities are not homogenous groups in that sense, but it would be what you've just said there, I think, is accurate in terms of what we are seeing, and what we are seeing generally in terms of community responses to these issues. And it is clear to us as officers that some of the rhetoric that's maybe playing out in whether it be across social media or otherwise, is in effect encouraging people to come into an area. That's not to say that Seacroft as a community, there are elements of that community that do have some concerns and whom we are engaging with, particularly through the elected members and through our key individual networks in those communities. But yeah, I think what you've just described there is broadly what we are seeing.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make 2 points. I suppose the latter of the points is more of a question. I think firstly, just coming back to the employment area and kind of how communities engage with authority. I think one of the things that is really important is looking at how we can encourage people from migrant communities to consider careers, in the police, working obviously in the NHS. We've got a large migrant population that basically keeps our hospitals afloat, but also looking at ways in which we can encourage people to take up employment, so that the work that's carried out by authorities is reflective of the community that it's serving. Secondly, I think Councillor Firth made an important point with regards to the conversations that we have with other communities, with non-migrant communities. And for me, there's a question of kind of how do we tell a story? Because I feel that quite often the people who express concern or perhaps even hostility towards migrant communities aren't necessarily interacting with those communities day in, day out. They're seeing it through a prism of media or via social media, which taints their views, as it is generally intended to do, to be more negative. So how do we tell a better story, and how do we reach out to those communities that perhaps do feel concerned but don't necessarily have direct experience?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Fowler. I think that that narrative is really, really important. I think going back to the Chair's point earlier, which is made to me prior to today, but I've been reflecting on it in terms of the richness of the partnership response in Leeds would, I think, be helpful if there was an opportunity to have a broader representation, certainly in this forum, of some of those key partners doing those that key work that you've talked about, and in and amongst that, issues would be illuminated. So we are aware, for instance, of some of those stories that you've talked about in terms of migrants securing roles and employment within some of the statutory services, including the police, interestingly enough, having come into this city as a new arrival. We also, in the council, look to utilise that, and again, it's coining that phrase, lived experience, but in terms of our response to the issues in Harehill some time ago, we did benefit from having a colleague from the Roma community working with us to provide that support around those cultural issues, those language issues, and those challenges. So I think there are some really fantastic stories of that in Leeds. I think the challenge back really is around, well, there needs to be more of that, and I would accept that, and that's some of the work that we as a team are looking to do, because I think that's what essentially moves us from resettling to thriving. You know, like we've talked about, education, employment. Lots and lots of people coming into the city who we meet, for instance, on the Migrant Access Project, have got skills and professions and experiences that absolutely are valuable for us in Leeds, and we've just got to make sure that we are supporting insofar as we can the pathways into those arrangements. And I think the challenge for us as officers and for our wider partnership is to do more of that, because I think you've touched on the key issue. I don't know whether any of my colleagues want to elaborate on any of that.
Probably just to add, I think Councillor Dalton's point about the positive benefits, I think, is a piece of work we need to do and something we need to publicise. It is something that is of real significance to the city. I think the narrative has been reclaimed over illegal, unlawful asylum, migration, rather than thinking about actually people are coming to live in the UK to add and enrich, in our case, Leeds, but also the country in terms of the skills, expertise, and even within our own workforce, we see this. So I think there is a better story we can tell, and one we should be telling. So thank you for those comments.
Okay, thanks very much. So, members, we've offered our perspectives. Is there anything that we wish to see in the next report that comes to us from the Migration Department? We've talked about those positive aspects. It's not so much that we need to have the positivity, it's more about having the more rounded picture and actually allowing migrants that come, that are the vast majority which don't have an interface with public services, to allow them to tell their story. It's a bit like with children's services. A lot of the time we hear about the looked after children, but they're a small minority, and sometimes the others need to be allowed to have a voice. So, Councillor Haig, you've got some suggestions?
Yes, and I think it's just in terms of taking the City of Sanctuary work forward, I'd like to see us develop a Leeds model of what the City of Sanctuary looks like, rather than relying on other models, just something that reflects our experience and our our migrant community's experience.
From what we've got so far.
Thank you.
Councillor Farley.
Yeah, just thinking back on the idea of kind of stories. I suppose it'd be quite helpful to have sort of some case studies, perhaps anonymised. You know, and I think both exploring kind of the good and the not so good, to give that sort of like balanced picture that Councillor Galton has suggested. I suppose there's also a question, Councillor Venner mentioned it earlier around Lift the Ban. I spoke at the Lift the Ban event in Leeds earlier this year. But I suppose kind of looking at kind of what more the council can be doing to encourage government around obviously removing the barriers that people face.
Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to add, I think that there needs to be certainly some further information in relation to the community work that's been done, because I think that's a hole in the report. Because if we are doing the work that we're doing, I think that part of actually communicating that may be helpful, actually putting it to pen to paper to have a look at that in the future.
Yes, there is a specific cohesion officer for the community committee refresh, isn't there? So we could expect them to form part of that reporting. Councillor McCluskey.
I'd like to see some sort of emphasis on the reliance we have on people who migrate to Leeds. Our health service, our care services, our hospitality, the various sectors that would not exist or couldn't exist without migration.
Actually, sorry, I've just thought of something as well. The majority of migration is also temporary. They don't become permanent residents within the city. I think it's quite useful to have some understanding of statistics around that. That would be quite useful. Sorry, Councillor Firth.
I'm just going to say that more information on actually the statistics, because then this is a scrutiny committee. Absolutely.
Councillor Venner.
I was just going to say, Chair, I particularly welcome your suggestion. I think it's a really interesting observation, and obviously from my former role, I appreciate the comparison with, you know, the 200,000 children in Leeds compared to the small group that are looked after, and the the need to have a more rounded report that considers that migration in its the widest picture is a really good suggestion, and also links with Councillor McCluskey's suggestion he's just made about the reliance on migrants and the sectors within our city and the country that are completely dependent on migration and where they make a really positive contribution. So thank you.
Thank you, members. We go on to our next item of...
We also need to take a view on the refresh of the new strategy. Just did a formal...
We need to take a view on the refresh of the new strategy, which...
Appendix 2, just whether the board's happy.
Which we can just say that we're generally appreciative and positive. Councillor Firth.
Can I just ask one final thing, which is it's been a lot mentioned today about lobbying our MPs and lobbying the government. Obviously, this council is controlled by the party that's in government, so I would appreciate any mention of requests made to government or lobbying of MPs within Leeds to be mentioned in the next report if the council is so in favour of changing particular government policy. Thank you.
Yes. I didn't recall the specific reference to lobbying of members of Parliament.
Well, I've mentioned it a few times, where I've mentioned a few times lobbying.
Oh, sorry, this is around the right
around
to work.
ESOL, around
So it's not official council policy. It's a what's the word? It's a campaign outside of the council.
I think it's a reasonable suggestion that we put in our migration strategy that part of our role as a council is to work with the government and lobby them to provide, you know, a policy framework that's positive to support our work. So yes, I'm happy with that suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we've covered all of our official duties on that particular item. Thank you very much for your interaction today. You are free to go if you wish, but we do have another item which is to discuss our Scrutiny Board summary statement, which is to do with our look at the police and crime report that we had last time, which ended up being a discussion around our responsibilities as a council and a police authority towards making sure that we are responding appropriately to electric bike usage in an antisocial manner, and also in terms of the ability for disabled people to be able to access the highway through things like pavement parking and the appropriate response and responsibility to the enforcement of that phenomenon to ensure that there isn't obstruction of the highway. Sorry, that was a bit of an elongated introduction. One of the things that we have done, though, is that the suggestion was that we would offer our insight as a scrutiny board from a different perspective towards the inquiry which is being carried out by the IIIG scrutiny board around the Vision Zero strategy, because they are the ones with responsibility for having highways as a department report to them. So we're going to be working in partnership with them by submitting a statement which hopefully you will be able to approve or to suggest amendments to in this item. And also we will be attending the meeting where it's being discussed. So I hope that's a good enough introduction for you for the paper here. Do we have any suggestions for amendments within the suggested statement, or are we happy for that to be pursued as it is? Councillor Dowson.
It's the sort of thing you think about all the time, isn't it, when you see cycles? And Leeds is very much becoming a cycling city. It's a very healthy activity and so on. It's the inappropriate use of cycles. So it's actually resolving that issue without stigmatising everybody else who's on a bike. And a lot of the issues around delivery bikes who inappropriately use footpaths as shortcuts through traffic lights and through the city centre and other town centres and so on. One of the issues is not being able to identify the perpetrator of something, because bikes don't have number plates like we have. And I know there's a lot of work going on with delivery companies, we are told, or we were told last time we discussed it. So one of the thoughts, and it might not be anything to put into a report, but it'd be something that might be of interest and may have been thought about already, is actually the delivery bags themselves. Because it's not the bike that's the issue, it's actually the driver of the bike. And to identify them, if the bags were numbered, then somebody seeing inappropriate behaviour could say it was that driver and they were carrying bag number. It's just a thought, and it's probably off the wall and not for this committee, but, and it's just something I was thinking of, sorry.
No, Councillor Darcy, it was mentioned last time, and it was one of those areas that we were hoping to get some clarification on in terms of correspondence between the police authority and the minister, because we were told that that had taken place. But I'm sure that clarification will come soon. But it doesn't stop us, of course, pursuing that same conversation, either through our interaction with the IIIG Scrutiny Board, but also in terms of the activity we were talking about earlier with the Police and Crime Panel, so that it has a greater immediacy, hopefully, in terms of the police themselves responding to those concerns. Did I see you indicating, Councillor Haigh?
Just wondered if it's worth having a line in this about what we as a council are can do to educate and inform people about e-bikes and e-scooters, because I think there is some confusion, because there are variations in the law, I would say, or interpretations of the law, and particularly with children and young people using e-bikes and e-scooters to get to school. And of course, e-scooters are not legal, but they are in use. So is there a piece of work there just about that education, especially with children and young people, about what they can do, what they can't do? Because, you know, having their vehicles seized by the police, etc. I'm sure most of them would not want to see that. They're quite expensive, some of these vehicles. So is there a potential for a line in the report around that and work we can do to, perhaps with schools, educate young people?
I'm sure that can be incorporated. Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. And just further to what Councillor Haig was saying, I think there needs to be a real point about communicating what actual successes we've had from the work that's been done. A lot more police teams, neighbourhood police teams, are putting it out on Facebook when they've got certain bikes. But I have to be honest, I have personally don't actively see the prevention team that in my area is based in Garforth actually doing that work in our communities, and that means that as much as it can go out on Facebook or social media, there isn't then actually seeing the action on the ground. I think that is a wider discussion about communicating that, because that may help in terms of the prevention as well.
Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chair. I think that there needs to be some other way that, even with the quad bikes and scooters, where they're all wearing black masks and you can't identify them, a situation in my ward has been where it's dragged on that long for it to come to the court that it's now all been dropped, so we're back to square one. And I think there needs to be a faster process where action can be taken regarding the quad bikes and the scooters and the e-bikes. And I don't think our roads are safe enough.
Well, I think the identification aspect was a key part of the request, I think, from the police authority to the government in terms of clarity of what can and can't be done. So let's hope that gets back in the correspondence. Did you indicate, Councillor Farley?
Yes. My sort of point that I wanted to make was, firstly, just to agree with Councillor Dowson with regards to kind of efforts to identify cyclists, especially in the city centre. I mean, sadly, we've had at least 2 people die in Bermondsey and Richmond Hill due to collisions with e-bikes and people riding on the pavement. So I suppose the sort of 2 points that really came to mind. Firstly, I wonder if there's a conversation to be had about taking a more regulatory approach to delivery bikes, not just identification, but even perhaps making it a licensing issue. I appreciate that might be a bit beyond this committee, but I feel that feels like an appropriate direction of travel. The second point is really around looking at how we can encourage people to use cycle lanes when they are using e-bikes. One of the I live right next to I live next to York Road in East End Park, and we've got older infrastructure there, but it is dedicated for cycles. And the number of times whereby I nearly get taken out by bikes just riding on the path is, it's literally there. You can use it. Please do so, rather than nearly hitting me, unless it's intentional, of course. But yeah, I would just think of ways in which we can encourage people to use what's already there.
I think that's supposed to be the value of scrutiny, really, isn't it? Is that in rapidly developing new circumstances, because Deliveroo and associated companies are here to stay, legislation hasn't kept up with the phenomenon. So actually our experience as community representatives demonstrating and evidencing the issues that we face is something which is very useful evidence to get that legislation in place sooner than it would be ultimately, hopefully. Councillor Renshaw.
Thank you, Chair. In the outer south, as you may know, we haven't got many cycle routes. So the busy roads that we have got, and in my ward it's the A61 and the A650, are totally unsafe to allow people to ride bikes on. I would not expect any of my family to go on a bike on those busy roads.
I think that's another one for the IG, which you might want to pass on to them.
Is it, I was just going to say active travel is active travel is also being considered in September, so I can pick up those comments with the chair. Yeah.
Councillor Firth.
I think there's also a wider point, Chair, in relation to the fact that, as mentioned about registering certain delivery drivers, that there's an increasing number of cases where, unfortunately, those delivery drivers are not actually delivery drivers and might be delivering something else, and I think that's certainly something that we need to add to that.
But nothing we can introduce into the statement that we're offering at this moment in time for the 2040 zero strategy. So with those amendments that have been suggested, we're happy to submit that. Yes? Thanks. Great. So all that we have next is noting our next meeting, which is the 6th of November. Look forward to seeing you. Is anyone actually going to experience fireworks on the 5th?
Oh, no.
No. I don't think there's any organised activity now, is there?
Well, I think maybe.